Welcome to the Iolani School podcast. I'm John Tamanaha, Director of Interactive Media and frequent morning visitor to the faculty lounge where coffee is usually accompanied by good conversation. This podcast project strives to share that sort of experience as we visit with people associated with Iolani School to hear their personal stories. This is our 20th episode and first of the 2021-22 school year, but it was recorded during last year's final week of school when audio engineer Kings Iolani and I went on location and sat down with Dr. Michael LaGory in his classroom. An English teacher at Iolani School since 1984, Dr. LaGory begins by telling us an amusing story about his hiring at our school, and then we learn about his days growing up in Ewa Beach and college years in California. We also discussed his role in chronicling the history of Iolani School and carrying on the legacy of Mr. Harold Keebles. Thanks for downloading. Please enjoy. It's funny, a story you once told me in the faculty lounge, I don't know if you remember this, it was years ago. And it is actually one of the reasons why this podcast exists. It's one of those stories that when I heard it, it just kind of came to my mind that other people need to hear this. And not because of the content of what you were telling me, but just because it would begin a conversation. Mm-hmm. It would start, I would think, a really interesting conversation. And so that is where I'm going to begin. Okay. I'm going to ask a question that I kind of think I know the answer to. So, sir, if you could please tell us the story about a conversation you had with Mr. Charlie Proctor, who was the former assistant headmaster and dean of faculty, upon you being hired at Iolani School.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure which part of the story or how much you heard, but I'll start on it, and you can stop me if I've passed it. But I was back in Hawaii, right? I'm a Hawaii public school kid. Mm-hmm. Picked pineapple, the whole deal for people of that generation. Went to college on the mainland and was back in Hawaii. ABD, if there are people in our audience who don't know what that means, that's all but dissertation in a doctoral program. And I had to come back for financial reasons. And I was teaching as a college lecturer for Chaminade. And it wasn't permanent work. And I was looking for something more permanent. I had been a college teacher for almost a decade. And I hadn't given much serious thought to high school teaching. But I began to consider it. In fact, I interviewed at two of the other well-known local schools, and not being taken by them, I look back on as one of those fateful blessings that I didn't realize at the time. And one day, a friend phoned me and said, Mike, the best high school English job in the state just opened up, and they're not advertising. You have to apply. And it was Iolani. So I said, okay, I phoned and I came in for an interview. And that was my meeting with Charlie Proctor. And it must have been right before lunch. And we talked, and we had a great talk. We were both very candid about my lack of high school experience. But one part of it that I often have looked back on and seen as funny is that I asked him, well, if I were hired, what courses would I be teaching? And he said, well, English 10, Shakespeare, and AP English. To which I responded with great sophistication, what's AP English? I look back on it now and wonder at Charlie's restraint in not bursting out in laughter or not in sort of sidling to the door or not doing as Charlie was known to do, to stand up from his desk and say, it's been nice meeting you.
Yeah.
But he didn't do that, and I didn't realize until later what a fool I had made of myself. My high school, of course, didn't have AP English. We didn't have calculus. In fact, my high school, my senior year, one of the English electives was Pidgin English. But, bless his heart and bless Dave Kuhn's heart, they were willing to take a chance on someone who very obviously lacked high school teaching experience and had a big growth curve ahead of him. But that was Charlie. He was willing to take risks, and he valued academic training and knowledge of your subject matter. Was that the part of the story?
Yeah, that was the part of the story. What's that? So you were teaching English 10, AP English, and you just come from Chaminade. Is AP English? I didn't take AP English. My wife took AP English. She doesn't let me forget that she took AP English and I didn't.
And she was a joy to teach.
But what was it like going from college level teaching to high school, although AP English at the highest level here at the school?
I was lucky. I can see now, that's another thing I didn't know then, how lucky we are in life not to know or to have some naivety. It's hard to imagine that happening again, being able to walk into a teaching line of AP English without experience at it. But one of the person who had been teaching it, Drew Browning, was leaving the school. That was his last year. He was going to the East Coast to another school. And Nancy Moss, the other teacher, was she was going to be on sabbatical, so they needed people to step in. And that's when Mrs. Miyamoto joined me, and she came also from the public schools, but I think she had been teaching AP English. And another teacher at Iolani, Kathy Andrasik, started teaching it the following year. So I didn't know what I was getting into, and it was a lot to take on. But it was, and I wasn't very good that first year, but my students were very forgiving, and I learned a lot. But the academic part of it wasn't hard, knowing the material. It was rather adjusting to high school, getting a sense of expectations, what it was reasonable to expect, and just adjusting to the pace of 8 hours a day on campus, nonstop, answering bells, being responsible, being in loco parentis all the time, and then going home for the night shift. As college teaching you're familiar with the collegiate environment, and it's a much more relaxed pace.
Yeah, but I do remember being an adjunct professor and getting those papers and getting all those things to read, and wow, it's tough. But you do feel that duty, just like a student would, to get it in for you to get it back. But the pace is quite different. As I recall, I never taught here at Iolani, but as a student, that pace is sometimes frantic.
I think we've got to get you into the classroom sometime. Our students could learn a lot from you.
Why teaching for you?
I joke that many of the most important decisions in my life were made for me, not by me. If I judged, if I had gotten the things that I wanted in life, I would have been much worse off. And unlike some of my colleagues, I never wanted to be a teacher, and I never thought of myself as one. I'd say I was acutely shy in high school, and that, frankly, has made me sensitive to quiet students ever since. Helps me to understand them and have sympathy for them, but also to want to draw them out because it's important for them. But remember, I did not come from an environment like Iolani. I was, was very unaware. Here's another story. My high school my high school college counselor spoke 5 words to me my entire time there. I knocked on the door timidly. Excuse me, sir, but I'd like to apply for college. Looking up grumpily from the card game he was playing with students, he said, without making eye contact, "The catalogs are over there." So if I ever hear students complaining about all the work or the time that they have to spend with college counseling, I tell them my experience. Appreciate the fantastic college counseling resources we have. Started by Mr. Feldhaus, another one of the Iolani giants of the past, and carried on by Mr. Fleming and his great staff. But I didn't know what I was getting into in college. I didn't have a clear path. I knew I wanted to use my brain. I had no idea what I wanted to major in. And here's how much self-knowledge I had. If you had asked me my first year of college, what do you want to major in? I would have said, the only thing I know is that I'd never major in English. I can look back now and see that I really wanted to, and that's why I thought that. But I had I had an inferiority complex, which can be very useful things. I think they're highly underrated. I would even recommend them to some people. But I went to college feeling assured that I was the least well-read and least well-prepared student in the whole freshman class, and probably near the bottom in ability, too. That gave me a lot of motivation to work hard. And I gradually discovered that no one else was all that far ahead of me, or they weren't as far ahead of me as I thought. And I had to declare a major after 2 years. And sort of in desperation, after experimenting with other majors, I gave English a try in the last semester of my freshman year at UC Santa Barbara. And that's when I had my revelation that this is what I want to do. I want to study literature. It turned out to be a blessing, too, because whereas other students were jumping from the start into courses they liked, I didn't know what I wanted to study, so I completed all my requirements. So while my classmates were grumbling about having to take some basic requirement as seniors, I was taking all the classes that I wanted. And furthermore, I needed those 2 years to adjust, to raise my work habits. And so when I became an English major, I was ready to do my best in my subject, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And again, I thought of myself as very shy. I was. I was the youngest kid. I didn't grow up around children, and we had a small family, and I was sort of socially retarded. But in it was the spring of my senior year in college. I was 20 years old. I got a letter from the university offering me a job teaching college classes there the following year. I had applied to graduate school, to a few graduate schools, and I hadn't gotten the acceptance yet when they offered me a teaching assistantship. And it was an offer I couldn't refuse, but my initial response was, who? Me? What could I possibly have to teach to people who are nearly adults? What do I know? And I spent 4 years there. I might have been the worst teacher in the history of the UC system, but because they didn't have a very strong teacher training program, but I learned over time. And I learned that I enjoyed it, and with time that I could be good at it, and it offered great fulfillment. So I sort of backed into it.
Yeah, it's one of those offer you can't refuse because it's a job.
Yes,
and you're in
I
college.
needed the money.
Yeah,
and then I never thought still of teach. I thought, well, okay, maybe I could be a college teacher. But then the opportunity to teach in high school, and I knew nothing about private schools. Again, I was a Hawaii public school. I barely knew where they were. You know, as a kid, to me, the thought of going to, say, to Punahou, it would have been like going to Mars. I mean, my family couldn't have considered it. And I thought I had no resentment of private schools. They just lived in another universe than I. So I stumbled into it blindly and discovered what I love to do.
You were a shy English major.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, when I hear that, that person is trying to become a writer. Or that would be kind of the idea in their mind. I can write. I'm here. I have a typewriter. It's probably a typewriter or a legal pad. And that I'm kind of that age as well with the manual typewriter. But yeah, taking that leap into teaching. Mm-hmm. And now you've done it, not to date you, but you've done it for a long time.
Somewhere between 40 and 50 years.
Yeah, somewhere in there. How do you keep it fresh? How does it, you know?
That's never been a problem for me. And I don't even get tired of teaching the same texts. I often make new discoveries in them. And it's the students and their energy and the joy of sharing discoveries with them. You know, this pandemic year has helped clarify for me the importance of teaching and the importance of Iolani to me. And I'm old enough to retire, but there's nowhere I would rather be. And also, just the spirit of Iolani has really rubbed off on me. It's made me a better worker, and it's made me, I think, a much better person. And there are so many people whom I look up to here.
I was here in Weinberg 202 yesterday, your classroom, observing your class, world literature. And yeah, please do not retire. That was really cool to see you working with the students and to see your interaction with them. And they and you were really impressive in that study. That was really cool to see. Thank you so much for all you do. Did you ever want to become a writer? I mean, you are a writer, but like a professional writer, like a...
Most English majors think of that, I'm sure. You know, that was another case probably where I was fortunate not to get my way. Early, when I was starting the English major, I was full of myself, like most 20-year-olds. And I wanted to try creative writing. Well, these poems I read seemed great, and the stories, I want to try that. And I tried to get into a class, and I couldn't. I went to the professor and pleaded. No, he said, it's full, and you don't have any kind of prerequisites. You're just beginning. And I walked away disappointed and resolved just to take the general requirements. I can look back now and see that, again, was a blessing in disguise. I knew so little that I wouldn't have gotten much out of a creative writing class. And I did a very traditional route through the major, and I can see now that it gave me a very good grounding in my subject matter. Instead of trying to skip it, and instead of trying to sprint before I could crawl, And I think even for creative writers, I can't generalize. I'm sure there are people who are infinitely more precocious than I could ever be, but I would have been much better off. I was much better off waiting to have something to say and to know something and to know something about the craft before I tried to write. But I have written things, and I've done academic writing, and I've done writing for Iolani, and I've done some creative writing. But I realize too, and there's a part of me that still feels a little bit unfulfilled, or maybe a little bit of guilt that I haven't done all that I could with my ability. But I can see now that I just had a stronger pull toward teaching. You could put it this way. It's sort of like a parable. It's 10 o'clock at night, and on your desk is a blank sheet of paper and a pen. And you could take it, and you could fill it with that unwritten poem. And on the other side of a desk is a paper by one of your students. And it doesn't go 3 straight words without making a mistake of some kind. You can choose to write that poem, and maybe you will be visited by the muse. Maybe this will be your moment of inspiration in which your genius flowers, and you will create something that's beautiful, that will be remembered forever, and that will be taught in AP English classes 200 years from now. Maybe.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's this poor child, full of ambition and hopes. His parents have made great sacrifices to pay the tuition to send him to this school. He has talent, but he needs help. And in order to realize those aspirations, he's got to be better prepared for college. And you have the ability to help him. What are you going to choose? There's on the one. What will? How do you? As Father Kuhn probably would have asked, how do you best serve God? What's going to do more for the human race? What's going to do more when you face St. Peter to say, I didn't waste my decades on this planet? The chance that you'll produce that brilliant poem. Or the greater likelihood that you will help that child.
Yeah, that's your calling.
And I think that's the way and maybe it's an excuse. And if there weren't great artists who took the road I did not take, there'd be no great art for me to teach. So thank goodness they do. So I reconcile myself to it by saying just what you say. That's the perfect word. It was a calling.
Oh. Well, the way I look at it, I have a creative writing English degree. Mm-hmm. And there's not really much I can point to at my classes at USC, but it's a respect for the written word, a respect for writers, a respect for things being written and researched, words chosen, words properly ordered that create a clarity. That respect for writing, that craft, that discipline, all of that, that's what you get in classes. That's what I saw yesterday. It's awesome. It's just like I tried to play the violin. I tried to play, I say tried. I was in the class, alto sax. I tried to play basketball. I was on the team, But now I have a respect for all of those things. I have a respect for chemistry. I'm not particularly good at all of those things that I mentioned, but you go to school, you learn, you gain an appreciation. And that appreciation for written word, for writers, is really important. And to appreciate clarity or meaning behind certain things, to read literature, to learn from a different time. Powerful.
Kings, I think this might be the guy that I have the most in common with. Because not only am I a would-be writer who studied English in college, but I'm also a sports junkie who had no talent. I'll bet I had less than you. We should go out on the court someday.
Didn't you used to come out to the lower school courts back in the mid-'80s?
Sometimes Mr. Greenhill and Mr. Suemori and some of the others and I would come out. But when I was
Takbugi even.
He would have destroyed me, but we didn't play with him. But when I was when I was about high school senior, or I was planning on being in the NBA until I realized that I was going to grow up to be neither 7 feet tall nor coordinated. So that revelation convinced me to start opening books.
I had a teacher. I should pay tribute to her right now in front of you. You know who she is. Marjorie Nelson. Marjorie Matthews, after she got married. I had her as both names.
Wonderful teacher.
10th grade English and advanced speech as a senior, probably. Mm-hmm. But she told me she knew I liked sports. Mm-hmm. And she said, John, you can write. And John didn't know he could write. And she said, you like sports? Maybe you should be a sports writer.
Good for her.
And that's what I went on to become. She lit that fire, and I would walk from my apartment in Waikiki to the Waikiki Public Library and read the LA Times sports section. And would read it for comprehension because I like those teams and I want to follow them, but also read it maybe a second time to see how do they construct these articles.
Yeah.
These game stories, these previews, these features, and all of that. And that's my Iolani Minute. You know the Iolani Minute that they ask people, like, what's the one story that you can tell us in a minute that makes this school special? If not for that, who knows what I would be doing.
And, that's what I meant when I said, in my little parable, there's so much good that you can do as a teacher. And look how much good Mrs. Matthews did to you. This has been a hard year for everyone, and there's so many big, difficult questions in our world that don't have clear answers, and they cause conflict and tension. But as a teacher, I can feel pretty darn sure that I'm doing more good than harm, and that I'm fighting on the right side.
You are a writer, because I know this because I frequent your writing often from the At Thy Call We Gather book, the Iolani School history book. You wrote I think 3 chapters about the history of this wonderful school, and it's fascinating. I am a graduate of the class of '87. You arrived in the mid '80s. We knew a fraction of what is contained in that book. And that book, I think, was published in 97.
97, yes.
And so that's a while ago, even from now. And I think we've learned more. I want to ask you take us through that process of researching and writing about the history of the school, which previously had not been done. There was some UH research that I've looked at as well, but what you did was awesome, and it's fascinating to look at.
Looking back on it, I see it as a great opportunity and one of the really memorable things I've been able to do in my career at Iolani. A very worthwhile project that I'm proud to have been a part of, and it was a great team effort. The school, I think, had great foresight and planning to write a history, and the board arranged it and brought together a group of people to work on it. Now, it was a very busy time. Of course, what year is not busy at Iolani? But it was I think it was my last year as a department head, and department heads have extra work. And I think it was around the time I was starting to work on the Keebles Guide. And with all those other things up in the air, I was asked to do this. And we were on a pretty tight schedule. We had to get it done in a year.
Wow.
In fact, that was, I think, one of 2 times in my career I did not work at the Iolani Fair. And the reason is that in April, there were a Friday, a weekday, when I didn't have to do Iolani work, and when offices were and libraries were still open, was precious. And I realized I could serve the school better by not volunteering and not coming to school that morning. I got a sub for those, whatever they are, 20-minute classes we have
you needed
on
every
fair day.
minute. Yeah.
And first thing in the morning, went downtown and went to and spent the whole day at offices downtown and at the University of Hawaii doing research. But it was exciting for me. I was trained to be a scholar and to put stories together. And of course, a historian tells stories, and I'm a big reader of history. And I read a lot of biography. And for me, history is, biography is a big part of history. It's a story of different people whose destinies came together. And I had already done some reading about it. So yeah, it was a frantic scramble. We had teams, and I ended up writing the chapters on the early history, the founding of the school, and then I think from the founding of the school to the switch to the Episcopal Church, right? When after the overthrow of the monarchy, the church passed into the jurisdiction of the Episcopal Church, which of course is the American branch, if that's the correct word, of the Anglican Church, which had founded the school. And then there was the next chapter, which covered the Nu'uanu. I think it was mostly the Nu'uanu campus. And then the other chapter I wrote, I think, was on sports, and that was fun. I think you are the obvious person to write the next edition, the chapter on sports. And part of what I did for that was to gather. I'm going to brag. I have a lot of vanity about this. I tracked down the score of every single football game Iolani ever played, and the coach, and their year-by-year one-loss record. But no, it was fun to make discoveries. I can remember the thrill of discovering in an office downtown a map that showed where one of the original campuses must have been located, and another site for the Bate Street campus. Finding that perfect photo and finding some articles that existed, discovering people like the first female hero in the history of Iolani School, Mrs. Mason, the English wife of one of the early leaders of the school. Her story should be told someday and would make a great feature. One of my fondest memories, though, of that project is the time my wife, Suzanne Cassart, retired Iolani English teacher, who was also working on the history project, when she and I went with Valerie Haas to the site of the old Nu'uanu campus, where the school was located from 1957 to 1954. We had known about it. Now, for listeners who don't know Miss Haas, she is also an Iolani legend. She was a Latin teacher. She worked for the school in one capacity or another, I think, for about 50 years. Yeah. She was one of the few faculty members around who had worked at the Nu'uanu campus.
Wow.
So one day we went there, the three of us, and we went to that site. Now it's where the Craigside development is now. It's like a retirement home.
Yeah.
And we walked around and walked over that hillside, and she said, "Oh yes, this is where Father Bray used to practice with the boys, and this is where Father Stone would make the boys go out, who were having a fight on the playground, go out onto the tennis courts before the whole assembled student body put on boxing gloves and settle their dispute like little men." And they usually came away, of course, being best friends after that. Now, of course, Father Stone, Pohaku as he was known, Pohaku, of course, being the Hawaiian word for stone, was a former Gold Gloves boxing champion. He was, about 6'5". Hear her tell those stories, that's a memory that I will cherish. She has long since passed away.
I've visited that site as well, and the tree that was on the Nu'uanu campus is still there between those two apartment buildings.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And there's that cemetery where the boys used to walk to lay flowers.
The Father Bray's field, it's sloped toward the stream. It's really neat.
I have a feeling the football ended up wet a few times when it went rolling down the hill, especially when somebody was really off the mark with a field goal attempt.
When you took on that undertaking, did you feel like a student doing research papers and all of that?
And it was fun doing that. It's fun to be a student again because we usually dish it out. We don't get to take it, and that's kind of invigorating to be a learner again and to create knowledge. Creating is a little. I'm giving myself too much credit. It was because there were some people who had done great jobs of gathering information before, and it was mostly a matter of compiling it, and putting it together into a readable form.
I want to take you back a number of years to when you were a student. What were you like as a high school student? You mentioned growing up here, Campbell High School, Ewa Beach. You're the class of, not to date you again, I hate to do this, but this is very milestone.
Same class as Mr. Hackler. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's
71?
been 50 years, 71.
Yeah, this is your 50th reunion.
Yes.
Campbell High School, what were you like as a high school student?
Well, Campbell was different than it is now. What is now, Elima Intermediate School, 7 and 8, was the entire 7 to 12 campus. And at that time, old Ewa Beach, was little more than a few two-tract housing sections carved out of the sugarcane fields. And when I was in 8th grade, all the kids from Ewa Elementary came and joined our school. These were all the children of the plantation workers. And the sugar workers, and so it was mostly Japanese and Filipino kids. And we jokingly called it the British invasion because it was right at the time of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Animals and all those groups. And our class got this influx of kids. And two of those people were Pam Fujinaka.
Wow.
My colleague as a wonderful chemistry teacher, and her older brother, who was my classmate, Douglas Goto, who was a brilliant guy and went on to be a successful businessman. But I was a little unusual in that I wasn't one of the Ewa plantation kids. I wasn't one of the military kids who would come and for 2 years and leave. I was a local haole who lived there. But it was good for me. It was no academic powerhouse, but it was. I can look back with sympathy on my teachers. They weren't always the greatest. My senior English teacher, not AP English because we didn't have it, had a bachelor's degree in psychology. Can you imagine the highest English class for seniors at Iolani being taught by someone with a bachelor's degree in psychology? But she was still a good teacher, and she encouraged me. And I was shy and socially maladjusted and skinny. I was, a would-be athlete with no ability and no muscles. I've always felt I kind of have a interior lineman's mentality in the body of a badminton player. Maybe junior varsity badminton player,
got some height.
third string. But yeah, I did get I was younger than most of my classmates, but I hit a growth spurt. I think I was 135 pounds when I left for college. But I'll tell you, I can put it this way. A story that captures being a high school student. The best thing I got out of that experience was not anything academic. It was this. One day, my senior year, I was walking along campus with a guy named Sam. He was part of my group, the strong academic kids. His dad was a naval officer and one of the college-bound ones. In fact, he was had been accepted to the U.S. Naval Academy. Okay. And we were walking along, and two skinny haole kids, and along came someone who looked exactly like Kings. Only this guy was mean and scowling.
Not like Kings.
Big, strong-looking guy, and he was striding with this scowl on his face, and he walked right toward us. And I was walking the other way on this narrow sidewalk, walking along with my friend Sam, and the big, surly-looking guy came up to us and said, "Hey, how's it, Mike?" And he shook my hand and walked on. And Sam looked at me in awe, and he said, "You know that guy? I thought he was going to beat us both up." And I said, "Oh, yeah, that's my friend Aaron. We play basketball all the time." And but that's what the experience did for me. It made me grow up among local kids. I grew up eating, haole kid, but eating rice in the the TV tray lunches that they fed us in the cafeteria. And it made me feel part of the local community and made me feel at home here and learn to get along with people and to love and to realize, too, that the differences are superficial and that if you're just nice to people, those big, scary-looking dudes will be the best friends you ever had.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know about Kings, though.
Yeah, sometimes. It might surprise people that you're from Ewa Beach. It might surprise people that you went to Campbell High School. I think. Oh,
they usually say, you got to be from mainland.
Yeah.
No. Oh, then you went to Punahou. No. In fact, I'll tell you
some people not believe you? They're like, no, because you have a sense of humor. Maybe some people probably think you're trying to pull something on them.
Well, I'll tell you a story or two from when I went to college. My first day in college, here's another answer to your question, what was I like? My first day in college was the first night of my life I had spent not under the same roof as my parents.
Wow.
Right? Much more sheltered in those days than kids are now. But I remember my first impression walking around Santa Barbara looking at the campus after I'd gotten on the airplane, and I thought, are they having a blonde convention here? What's going on? And I had the experience of being a non-minority minority. And I realized that I looked like everyone else, but I didn't quite think the same. And I was always very conscious of being from Hawaii. I like to say that I had to go to the mainland to become Hawaiian. I mean, obviously not ethnic Hawaiian, but I mean, to realize how important a part of my identity this place was, because it was all that I knew.
Yeah.
And I didn't think, but I realized that I was different. And don't get me wrong, I love those people. I made some lifelong friends at college. I thoroughly enjoyed my 8 years there. But deep down, I always knew I loved Hawaii and I wanted to end up back here. And fortunately, I was able to. But here's the other story from my college days. One day, one of my English professors I think he was talking about 18th century poetry. And he was, no, it was William Butler Yeats. There was a poem with some Latin in it. And he asked the class, well, what does this Latin phrase mean? And no hands went up. He said, doesn't anybody know? What do they teach you in high school nowadays? And then he turned to me and said, Michael, surely you know what this Latin expression means. And I said, no, I'm sorry, Professor Ramsey. And inside I was thinking, Professor Yale undergraduate, Princeton, PhD, Mr. Ramsey, who doesn't quite grasp that at the school I attended, Pidgin English was an elective for seniors. But I'm still, I'm glad for the experience that I had. I can't remember where we started all this.
I'm going to go back to college, but you mentioned that Pidgin English elective. I thought you were joking the first time you mentioned that. Campbell High School had a Pidgin English elective?
And some of my classmates wouldn't have graduated. They wouldn't have passed English without it.
Wow.
It may have, you know who else was a teacher there? Was my senior year. He may have even taught that class. It was Jim Leahy, the famous sportscaster.
From Ewa Beach, yeah.
He and his brothers were among the first graduates of Campbell High School. Campbell opened only in the early 1960s, and I was a graduate of 1971. The school wasn't 10 years old. And, of course, they lived in Ewa Beach. And, of course, their dad was a famous sportscaster, Chuck Leahy, who used to broadcast with his color man, of course, you know who it was. It was Chuck Halter, former Iolani teacher, incredible Iolani coach, social studies teacher. Or he did the color man, excuse me, he was the statistician. And of course, the next generation, right, of Kanoha Leahy is an Iolani grad.
That's really interesting because Andy Mumatai was doing what I think it was called the weekly daily Pidgin show. And he would break down a word. And it was actually, it was fascinating, and why there's, what the etymology of these words were, and explained it. It was awesome. He explained why Portuguese jokes, why that exists.
Yes.
Because those guys were the bosses, and everybody makes fun of the bosses. Yeah. It's not necessarily anything other than that. Yeah. But that's cool.
When I was in college, for some reason, I don't know why, I try to conceal my Hawaiian identity. I had to unlearn my pidgin, or I'd conceal it, and I never wore aloha shirts or anything local. It was just, and it wasn't that I was ashamed. It was just some kind of weird form of pride.
You broke into pidgin a little while ago. I like that. That was good.
So, well, if I'm in that, when I'm with the people I'm most comfortable with, and if I'm perhaps under the influence of the correct
yeah. I know you more as the voiceover of Father Bray. Once in a video, you were the voice of Father Bray. That was awesome. But you also have a pidgin voice. That's cool. The college that you're mentioning is the University of California at Santa Barbara. You earned your bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees from there. What was that like? Oh, there's a picture right there of UCSB.
Wonderfully happy years, and I like to, I often find myself telling my students how much they're going to enjoy college. They're a lot more mature than I was.
Especially if they go there. It's right on the beach.
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful,
awesome.
Beautiful campus. Yeah. But I was not mature academically. I had gotten good grades at my high school. It was sort of hard not to if you showed up. But I really needed to catch up. In fact, my first college paper came back to me with one word on it. I thought, hey, I'm pretty hot stuff. I always got A's in English in high school. This should be a snap. I wrote my first paper. The professor wrote one letter and one word. How do I put this? The letter was not. It was not in the last 22 letters of the alphabet.
Uh-oh.
And it had a plus next to it. The word was an 8-letter compound denoting a, shall we say, a bovine product.
Oh, wow.
A male bovine product. I think you know what letters.
Yeah.
You can infer that the first letter of this word was B and that the last letter was T.
Yeah.
Could you imagine what would happen? What Dr. Cottrell would do if I wrote that on one of my students' papers? Not that any Iolani student has ever given me the slightest temptation to write that on a paper. But that was my first. So I needed to grow up as a student. But looking back at it, for the grades I got my first 2 years in college, I might as well have been out having fun and going to parties. But I wasn't. I was trying. But fortunately, I caught up academically. And as I said, when I discovered a subject that I liked, English teachers like paradoxes. When I discovered a subject that I loved, college became easier and harder. Harder because I worked harder than I had ever worked before in my life, but easier because I loved doing it, and there was nothing else I wanted to do. I was just, people go to college hoping to fall in love. I fell in love with literature and with words and with poetry.
That's great.
With the girls there, not perhaps quite as successful. The trail of broken hearts I left behind was a short one.
When you mentioned the marks that you got on your paper from that professor, it just automatically leads me to the Keebles Guide, which is a guide of codes that you and the English teachers here leave on the students' papers. You created it. You codified what Harold Keebles was teaching and that method of correction. Tell me about that.
Okay, when I came to Iolani, I missed Harold Keebles. He died 2 years before I came, and he had to retire after he had a stroke 4 years earlier. So I just missed him. I have visited his burial site in Punchbowl, where my own parents are inurned. But he had brought to Iolani in 1965 a method that was widely used in college for correcting papers, using codes for errors of grammar, punctuation, and usage that are coded to rules in a textbook. The textbook we were using was called a composition handbook. The editors were Maris and Griswold. We still have a couple of copies, I think, in our archives. I had been a college teacher for years, and we had done this. In fact, at UCSB in grad school, we were on the quarter system, and very foolishly, they changed the grammar textbook every single quarter. As I said, it was not a well-run teaching, teacher training program for teaching assistants at that time. But what that meant was that I had learned usually 3 grammar books a year for 4 years. And I got to know them in and out. And I knew how to read them, and I knew how they were organized. And I could even tell you, well, this one has this advantages, and that one has this advantages. We had been, we used the composition handbook for a while. And we changed to another book. We liked the method. When I say we, I mean the English department. We changed to another book that was fuller and more sophisticated. It was by a woman named Diana Hacker. Graduates of a certain generation will just hear the word hacker and will laugh or roll their eyes. But that book suffered what I call the fate of all, it went the way of all textbooks. Every 3 years, they're on a schedule for revision so that they can, because educators and publishers have 2 different purposes. Yeah. The booksellers want to make money. So it's sort of like planned obsolescence. They change it every 3 years. They make it a little fatter. They put on a glossier cover, and they change the rules or the organization around just enough so that it's inconvenient as heck to use a hand-me-down copy of an earlier edition, and then they jack up the price a few bucks. And I took on the role in the department of helping us. I actually made these conversion charts. So, the different students in your class would have 2. There were times when I even had 3 different editions in the book because students who got things from older brothers or sisters. And I suggested twice that we make our own book.
Yeah.
And finally, the department went along with me. We made a proposal. This was around 97, the same around the time of the Iolani history, busy year.
You were doing a lot of publishing.
And the department agreed that I would write it, and they would, I'd give them a draft, and they'd edit it and make suggestions. So that's how it came to exist. Of course, that was just before the computer explosion, and we printed it in hard copies, like in a spiral binder form. And for years, students used it. There are probably still a few copies of that in the archives. I think I have one in my closet. But then in around 2002, I think it was, we put it online.
Yeah, website.
Now, at that time, I didn't have the time or the ability, so I got a wonderful student, class of 2002, Melody Chu, who did actually put it together. And of course, we had help from another wonderful person from Iolani's past, Glenn Young, who someday a story should be written about the history of technology at Iolani. Yeah. What a tale that would be with that huge mainframe computer you probably remember in the I-Wing.
With the cards.
Yeah. And I went on revise. Finally, in I think 2014, I remade it completely as a Google site. I have to remake it again this summer because of the changes that Google makes. Talk about planned obsolescence. But and that's how it came to be. Our purpose was to make something that was, as user-friendly as possible. It was fun. It was tailored to the needs of Iolani School, but also it was essential to tailor it to the needs of the teachers, because it's a communication tool between teachers. Right, for a teacher, some of the most important work you do as an educator is silent communication with an audience of one. You work very hard, if you're good, if you're dedicated, at writing comments explaining what that individual student needs to know. No one will ever read it but that student. But the communication that happens there can be vital. It can open eyes. It's more a matter of a million small steps that they take than a few huge steps. But the codes have to be useful. And it's much harder. Those books we used to use, the codes would be, whatever, subject-verb agreement would be 1A3. But then if they had the second edition, it was 4F1. And if they had the third edition, it was 12Y2 or something like that. So, but in the Keeble's Guide, the code for subject-verb agreement is SV.
That makes total sense.
And the code for verb tense is VT. So we tried to make it user-friendly, because if it's too hard for the teacher to learn, the teacher won't use it.
It's so beneficial for the student to look at the page and see SV a few times or ST, and you know what you got to work on.
Yeah, we need. I tell students that everyone makes errors. They're natural. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. You'll make the average student, the A papers that I get from the seniors, the best English school students in the school, have about 20 mistakes that I could code. I used to be a editor also. And I had that. That's another reason I just happened to be the right person for this job. But and I might add too, I won't be here forever, and we need someone to take over for me eventually the job of coordinating it and updating it.
Part of the Keeble's Guide, my favorite part, maybe the Mall of Cliches is my favorite part, but my second favorite part is these memos that are included to the student and to the teacher. And you just kind of touched upon one, like everyone makes mistakes. Even, it says, even your English teachers make mistakes. They do not expect you to be perfect, and they do not want you to play it safe and avoid new words and constructions. They want you to learn rules, to become critical readers of your own work. It's awesome. Just to kind of set that, we're talking about the Keeble's Guide, and you're getting all these corrections, and there's red ink, but that's what's going on here.
That's from the introduction. Very few people ever read that. My vanity is greatly flattered that you should. I
have this other one. The effective errors. Not all flaws in writing are equal in importance, but all of them involve the primary responsibility of a writer, helping the reader.
Yes.
And that's why we're here.
My favorite thing in that introduction section of the Keeble's Guide is one part of it that is genuinely great writing. And I say that without immodesty, because I didn't write the words. They are quoted from an Elizabethan poet, Ben Jonson, and he says this. It's in the to the teacher section, and it's kind of advice. No more would I tell a green writer all his faults, lest I should make him grieve and faint, and at last despair. For nothing does more hurt than to make him so afraid of all things as he can endeavor nothing. Therefore, youth ought to be instructed early, betimes, he says, early, and in the best of things. And I love this metaphor, a master should, this is the best advice I've ever heard from for teachers. Therefore, a master should temper his own powers and descend to the other's infirmity. If you pour a glut of water upon a bottle, it receives little of it. But with a funnel, and by degrees, you shall fill many of them, and spill little of your own. To their capacity, they will all receive. and be full. And that's
Wow.
see, I think that's perfect for teachers because, we know, I remember Larry Braden saying to me once, our legendary math teacher, I've forgotten more math than the best student I've ever had knows. And every student in the room is different. And you don't, smash them with every single mistake they make. And I don't correct, frankly here, maybe it's impolitic to say this, but I don't grade the brilliant future valedictorian's paper the same way that I grade the struggling student's paper. I'm not talking about the grade I give them. I'm talking about the comments that I make. I always tell students, if you're at this level, say at the level of my knee, I want to bring you up to my waist. But if you're at the level here of my shoulders, I want to bring you up over my head. That's our job. See where they are and figure out and analyze. It's a great deal of teaching is analytical thinking. What doesn't this student know? And the best teachers are always asking themselves the most basic questions about their disciplines. Why is the student not grasping this concept which seems so elementary to me? And again and again, I have asked myself, I've had to rethink those most fundamental questions about my discipline. And I think that's made me better able to reach students at different levels.
That's great. Did you read this and write this, the note to the teachers in the Keebles Guide? We will close with a plea for what may be the teacher's most important virtue, patience.
Yes, that was my word. That's something I had realized a long time before. We have to remember, right? It's you have to be a good teacher. You have to be unselfish. Once in a while, I'll see it in a student. I'll see. I've had these moments over my years when one day in a year class, maybe it's in the middle of April, I'll look at a student and say, that kid could be a good teacher. And somehow And it's a combination of toughness, of attention to detail, of a good analytical mind, but sensitivity to others. I see it, for instance, when I'm seeing a student helping a peer. And yes, some people, I don't know if it's that they're too smart, but they just don't have the patience to wait and to keep, okay, you don't understand it, let's back up again. Oops, we've got to back up. Oops, we've got to back up again. Yeah. Some people. And patience is also important because students don't learn everything all at once. I always feel as if I haven't done my job when, after, I've taught a novel or a play or a poem, if the student doesn't know everything I know about it. At the same time, I know that's completely ridiculous because I might have been studying this thing for decades, decades longer than the student has been alive. But I want to share with them what's so exciting about it and what's so wonderful. I try to keep things in perspective and be patient.
Are you going to lash out at me if I draw a line from Harold Keebles to you?
That's what it is.
You are our Harold Keebles. And you'll protest, but let me ask you this question. If you and your wife, Suzanne Cassart, had this dinner party with Harold Keebles, what would you three talk about?
So that is a great question. Now, your listeners may think, they'd probably be saying things like, which is your favorite of the 8 kinds of preposition?
No, I don't think so.
Things like that. But in this, I think it would be a couple of things, and you might be a little surprised. Mm-hmm. One would be, maybe the first one would be, I'd want to know more about his poetry.
Yeah.
Because he wrote poetry. And I think most of it was not published. But I'd like to know more about that mind and what was inside him. And the second thing, this may seem kind of pedestrian, I would really like to know about what Iolani was like today, and especially, I'm being I'm embarrassed to say it's kind of gossipy. I'd want to know about the other people who were here. Like, for instance, I've heard that Charlie Proctor was really a little wise guy when he was in his 20s. What was he really like? Or what was Doc Mugi Ishii like? And so forth, about the people who were here at
because
that time.
They were students. Dave Masunaga is a student.
Yeah.
Cliff Lee is a student.
And,
wow.
Doc
Inouye.
There's an age when dinosaurs walked to the earth, when, Bing Fai Lao and these people who are Iolani legends, the young Eddie Hamada.
I want to ask you this. Writing is very personal. And it's not just due to the content. It's a personal creation. Mm-hmm. It's something that I or someone makes. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the blank page, 10 o'clock at night, a pencil. Then we craft. We suffer. We go through this process of creating something. Yeah, but it's ours. Mm-hmm. In your role, you play the difficult role of the feedback giver.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I mean, that's...
Yeah. Students don't realize how lucky they are to have a captive audience of one who 100% of whose attention is devoted to their writing. Because when you really become a writer, as you know, you need an audience, and you're hungry for an audience. And the problem is that nobody wants to read it. Everybody's got something better to do. Who does not have a better thing to do at this moment than to read the 800-page epic novel the young writer has just produced?
Yeah.
And he's poured his heart and soul into it, and he wants somebody to read it. You have to capture their attention. So the students are really lucky to give that. And I've felt a sort of sense of mission. I'll go back to yet another undergraduate story that explains the way I feel about it. When I was this has happened to me countless times in college as an English major. I took my writing too seriously. It was like life or death. As I said, I poured my heart and soul into it. I cared so much about every paper I wrote. I crafted every sentence, and I was hungry for response. I didn't want to be patted on the back necessarily. I wanted people to help me because I knew I didn't know much. And I wanted criticism. So I'd turn in the paper, and I would be full of tension and nervous energy. I'd turn it in at the end of class, and then and I'd wait. And then 2 days later, it was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, we'd meet, and I'd be waiting the whole time to get the paper back, and the professor wouldn't return it. And then on Friday, he wouldn't return it. And the next week, he wouldn't return it. And the week after that, he wouldn't return it. And a month later, when you had almost forgotten about this thing that you cared about so much, at the end of class, the professor would say, "Oh yeah, I finally got around to finishing those papers. You can find them on a box outside my desk." So the moment the class ended, I would sprint from that lecture hall to the professor's office and dig frantically through that box and pull out the paper, and I'd find mine. And usually what happened at the end is I'd find a grade in pencil and nothing else. Now, after that first experience, I didn't get any more male bovine products. And the grade was usually somewhat better than that first one, but it was so disheartening. And that actually was a formative realization for me in my career, too. At that time, I still... here's what I thought. I thought, if some cruel fate, like the God in a Thomas Hardy novel, ever decides to make me a teacher just out of a sense of nasty irony or something like that, or to punish someone, at that point I still had no idea I would be a teacher. But if I ever were made a teacher, I said a vow then that I would return my students' papers the next day that class met, and I would give them 100% of my effort and take their work seriously and and I would criticize them in constructive ways to try to help. And to this day, I mean, that's my method. I wanted to, if it's a great paper, I'll say, this is what you do well, and this is what you can do to get better. And if it's a terrible paper, I said, well, this is what you do well, and these are the most important things you need to do to get better. But so it's partly because I know what it's like to care so much about writing that I feel this sense of dedication to my students.
Yeah, and it's so personal, so the judgment aspect comes into it. And like we read about that note to the students in the Keebles guide, that you don't want the kids to play it safe.
Yes.
But, there's it needs to be clear. We need to talk to the reader.
And I have a reputation, I know, as a hard grader, but actually, I have softened, and I try to keep the grades in perspective too. Samuel Johnson, the great English writer, the second most quoted English author after Shakespeare, said in his, I think it was the preface to his edition of Shakespeare, he said, I have adopted the Roman sentiment that it is better to spare a comrade than to kill an enemy. In other words, it was something like erring on the side of caution, or not being too harsh, or saving something rather than cutting it out. And that's kind of the way I feel about my students writing too. I would rather err on, when it's 10:30 at night and the stack of papers, there are only a couple more left, and you really want to get to bed, and you're torn in one of those B- or C+ decisions. That's when I usually end up on the soft-hearted side that says I'd rather spare a comrade.
Your wife, we've mentioned her, Suzanne Cassart, also an English teacher, a wonderful English teacher who retired in 2013. I miss getting those holiday pencils. She would come by, and one also for my daughter always. You two live across the street, and you, I don't know, literally overlook the campus.
Literally and figuratively, yes.
And, you call security if something happens or whatnot. But you guys are right here and have been a staple in our school
for more than
many
3
years.
decades.
Yes.
We have watched, the homecoming game or football games and sports events from the lanai of our
awesome.
apartment. There is a danger, though. You have to be sure that you're fully clothed when you're living that near the campus.
I want to read this to pay tribute to your wife. In the Mua Iolani, Angie Anderson of the class of 13, who Kings knows, she wrote of Suzanne Cassart's retirement, an incredible educator and mentor. She taught with patience, there's that word, and cheerfulness, qualities sometimes rare among Iolani teachers. She inspired the pursuit of knowledge, and she went on to expound. But what a great tribute to a great teacher.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. She absolutely loved teaching. When I met her, here's an Iolani story for you.
Is this an Iolani minute?
I think it might be.
Yeah.
When I was hired at Iolani, I told you that story, because I had no high school teaching experience, they sent me to a summer institute for writing teachers in the summer of 1984. And it was there that I met a teacher from Kahuku High School, who a few years later was my wife, and who followed me to Iolani. So if not for Iolani, I would not have met her. I have little doubt that I'd still be single today, given that because my my social skills, my powers of charm have not progressed much from the college days. But so she came out here, and she loved being here and made many wonderful friends. She left because she kept getting messages. God was trying to get her attention, as the blues man Keb Mo says. She was got to the point where she couldn't see because of her eye. Her eyes. It was very hard for her to grade papers. So and it was very hard for her she had tendonitis in her wrist, so it was painful to grade papers. So they switched her to English 9, where she could teach speech, and she had problems hearing and was checked for hearing aids. So she finally said, along with some other health indicators, it's time. But it was reluctant. But she left with reluctance and with great love for this school and her students, and with so many great friends that we have here.
And you shared this classroom with her. W202.
When the Weinberg building opened, we thought, oh, hooray, every teacher can have his or her own room. Well, the school continued to grow, and soon we had to share classrooms. And it was Dr. Hall who came to me at that time and explained this. And I thought, she said, well, where would you like to go? Would you like to? And I thought, this is a risk, but if I'm going to share a room with someone, maybe it should be my wife. Now imagine, listeners, imagine spending with your partner, spending 8 hours a day in the same, what is this, like 30 by 30 foot space, and then coming home again. So it's a good test of your marriage, and we're still on speaking terms.
I too would not have met my wife if not for Iolani School.
That's true.
Although she probably, didn't want to have anything to do with me during those years, but yeah, being in a room during that many waking hours might is a test of a marriage. We are doing this.
We teachers understand each other, though. And another way, it's harder, I think, for non-teacher spouses to know what our lives are like. So we understand each other and the little frustrations and anxieties of the day.
We are doing this interview in W202 on the yearbook day. Yes. Usually the yearbook dedication and service awards assembly in the lower gym. Today it was a yearbook celebration as it was dedicated to Eric Yamamoto of the class of 99.
They could not have chosen better.
Yeah, beloved Associate Dean of Students. 17 years ago, sir, the yearbook was dedicated to you. And I really don't know if there is a bigger honor to have that annual be dedicated to someone. And 17 years ago, the school, the yearbook staff, thought enough of you to do that, to bestow that high honor. And you are still here doing that. And we thank you for that. I do want to read something that Val T. Iwashita wrote in the dedication portion of the yearbook.
You really do your homework.
I'm a Iolani grad. I do my homework. I might not always do it well, but I do it, and I show up to class, and maybe I sit in the front. Like Mr. Keebles, Dr. LaGory can be an intimidating presence in the classroom as students confront his magnitude of literary knowledge and the precision of his red pen. Dr. Washta is a good writer as well. Yes. From Homer and Shakespeare through Keats and Austen, right up to Robert Frost and Toni Morrison, the river of his wisdom runs deep, The wisdom of his wisdom runs broad and deep. After the initial shock of seeing all their writing errors mercilessly exposed in Keeble's code, students find that they actually can write smooth, meaningful, even elegant prose. And that's when they begin to say, quote, Dr. LaGory is the best English teacher I have ever had. That is the thoughts of many students who have come through this school. My wife included, who she told me that, and this is for decades. So from all of them, and hopefully for all the ones that are to come, thank you so much.
Well, thank
Dr.
you.
Michael LaGory.
This morning, Mr. Yamamoto said the experience was humbling to get that recognition, and even just hearing Dr. Iwashita's words makes me have that sentiment one more time. I'll never forget that day. And this morning I wrote to Mr. Yamamoto and congratulated him, and I said, "Congratulations on joining our little club of the dedicatees, and we're a pretty rowdy bunch. So now you can come along and discipline us."
In 365 days, hopefully we all see you sitting in that same section.
We would love to do that.
In the lower gym, all together as one team.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Tamanaha, and the awesome Kings, and the wonderful job that you do and all that you contribute to our school. And I've really enjoyed the podcast series and feel honored to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for the time. Take care.